just on that Nigel Farage story, we are going to talk about it a little later in the show with my good friend, not Jackson Hinkle, who doesn't like me very much. But he is a full-on Russian apologist, no doubt at all. He is genuinely a full-on Putin apologist. I don't think Nigel Farage is, but it seems to me some of the language he used, the sort of, well, on the one hand, the EU and NATO wanted Ukraine to join, and that took Ukraine away as a buffer state. But on the other hand, Putin shouldn't have invaded. He seemed to somehow, in some of the language Farage used, to equate these two things as both being equally bad. I'm sure he didn't mean that. He's not a stupid man.
No, but again, this saddens me as someone who agrees with much of what Nigel says. He's got form on this particular topic. He's always been clear that he has some sympathy with Putin, and he's expressed that over the years.
Is it, what way is he sympathy with Putin?
Well, repeatedly in conflicts over the years, he's taken the Putin side. I mean, it's just the truth. Nigel not taken his side, but shown some understanding or appreciation that I don't think is deserved. But this, I think, fits into a wider global picture in which particularly the American right, which Nigel is very close with, has acted as a degree of...
And we've seen the difficulty of getting the finances to Ukraine to fight Vladimir Putin, and that's been something on the Republican side. I mean, one thing that I really dislike when people said that Nigel Farage, you said you admired Vladimir Putin. In the full statement that when he made those comments, he said it a number of times, as a human being, no, not at all. As a political operator, he absolutely must say, I admire him as a political operator. I mean, my God, the man is a brilliant political operator, Vladimir Putin. He's disgusting. If I had the opportunity to shoot him in the head, I would do it.
Yeah, well,
I'm sorry, but I mean, he's a murderous, tyrannical dictator. Yeah, I want him off the planet. But if you don't admire him as a political operator, you ain't been paying attention.
Yeah, being able to send your political opponents to Siberia where you bump them off does have its own advantages. I think if Rishi Sunak could do that, even he might win.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, do you think? I have a funny feeling he probably still wouldn't. That's what the polls are saying. Anyway, just funny, we're going forward to go into other stories. The Institute of Fiscal Studies have been giving a press conference today. They're basically looking at particularly the Tories and Labour, the two viable parties for actually being in government as of July the 4th, basically looking at their tax plans and their manifestos. And they basically said the main parties have hidden and ducked their real choices on tax and spending. Voters have been left in the dark over how they plan to fund their spending commitments, offering just thin gruel. And they said there is a conspiracy of silence from both about how they're going to meet the challenges that they identify, like reducing NHS waiting lists. I mean, got a lot of time for the Institute of Fiscal Studies, particularly Paul Johnson, big friend of the show. But I have to say, tell us something we don't know. I mean, whenever any of the parties say, oh, they're going to raise your taxes, I always like, you're all going to raise our taxes, and you're lying if you're not going to admit that.
But here's the thing, Julia, taxes have never been higher. They are the highest they've been in 70 years. And to be turned around and told, oh no, they're going to have to go up further, and the Labour Party making spending commitments left, right and centre, it is a very worrying picture. You cannot keep infinitely putting up taxes higher and higher and higher. The wealthy people in this country will simply leave.
No, we're already seeing that statistically. We are now, other than China, we're the only country that's actually seeing wealthy people leave. Wealthy people who might go, well, sod off then. Yeah, but they pay, very wealthy people pay sort of, 60 people's share of tax, not just theirs.
The top 1% pay 27% of all taxes in this country, right? They're paying their fair share and 26 other people's, right? And we will lose more and more. But there are some big unspoken conspiracies of silence over what is driving this. The biggest one, and look, not every listener will love me for saying this, but is the extraordinary long-term benefits we give to pensioners in this country. The state
we have one of the lowest pensions in the Western world.
But it is ratcheting up every year. It starts at a comparatively early age at 67. People are now living in 30 years onwards with complex medical conditions.
But are they able to continue? This is the difficulty. Are you able to continue your work if your job involves any physical?
We do that with a shrinking working population, such as the ratio between those who are in work, paying for today's retirees. You don't have a magic pension pot. Today's workers are paying for what you're doing, has shrunk from 4 to 1 to below 3 to 1, and it's on its way to 2 to 1. It's
going to get worse, exactly. Well, what we need to be doing, as I keep saying, is building more houses, so cheap accommodation, so people can afford to settle down and have the number of kids they want.
I couldn't
We
agree
need
with,
people to
couldn't
have
agree.
children. We don't need to import people. We just want people to be able to have as many children as they want, be able to afford to do that in this country. You can't currently because we don't have enough available
Polling of
housing.
women shows that the average woman in this country wants to have 2.5, 2.6 children. They're having 1.6. They're having a full one child fewer than they wish to have.
Most amazing stat I read on this, we had a guest on the studio who's done loads of research on this worldwide, is that in the Western world, if a woman hits the age of 30 without a child, she has only a 50% chance that she will ever have a child.
And by 35, it's basically non-existent.
Yeah, but not even like trying. There's literally, they're just not going to have it. It's not your chances. You're just not going to have a child because you're not going to settle down. And we have a really serious issue in the whole of society organised around people not settling down to the point when it's too late to easily get pregnant and easily have healthy children. And again, as someone who's only got one child because of doing it too late, I'm evangelical on this issue. The thing is, I think most of the really big problems this country has are problems that are so long term. No government that makes any announcement, whether it's about building nuclear power stations or anything like that, or whether it's about dealing with social care, dealing with pensions, dealing with our demographic time bomb, which, by the way, is not as bad as many other countries are facing, but nevertheless is a demographic time bomb. You don't get the benefit of it. You see, our politicians don't think in 20 years, or they don't think in 5 years. They think in 24/7 news cycles, and so nothing long term is done, which is what I find so frustrating. But look, we know there's not going to be any money when Labour get in. We know that. The polls say Labour will be the next. I think even the Tories admit that Labour are going to be the next government. There's not going to be much money. So is a lot of people warning that if you haven't got all the money to go, here's some for the NHS, here's some for schools, here's some for this, here's some for that. Even if they stop by all of their pledges, and most governments don't, we're looking at pittance, in terms of an extra 6,500 teachers, cutting the waiting list by a tiny amount. They're only committing to halving the waiting list by the end of 5 years. I mean, we're still looking at there is not enough money for the public services people want, but we won't pay the taxes to get the level. But are we going to be seeing a move towards more culture wars? And is this a giveaway of this? Labour saying not only they want to make it easier to allow people to transition their gender, they say it's undignified at the moment, having to prove that you've been living as the opposite gender and having to go and see a panel of experts. They say just one doctor can sign you off and you don't have to prove anything, you just have to wait 2 years before that certificate is signed off. But also dropping the new government guidance from the Tories, banning schools from teaching gender ideology, i.e. telling children blatant lies that they could be born in the wrong body and that there are more than two genders. Is this the start of the culture wars we could expect from a Labour government?
Boy, oh boy, is it. And it's going to get much, much worse since. And every single day I see Labour's poll rating creep up, the more of this nonsense that they feel willing or brave enough to pump out. We've seen this gender nonsense. We've seen on the Constitution, they've admitted today they're going to stuff the House of Lords. They're going to bring in votes for 16-year-olds. They're going to potentially allow anybody, whether or not they're a British citizen, who's been long-term resident in the UK, to vote in our elections. They've admitted that they're going to put up capital gains tax, which will stop small businesses investing. They've admitted that they're going to bring inheritance tax onto farms, which will stop farmers handing down
the reason why it wasn't on
son.
Farms was deliberately so you could actually keep the farming communities going.
It's going to be really devastating. And what I question is, look, Labour say, look, we want to spend all these things, but we're not going to break our fiscal rules. Okay, fine. How are we going to fund it? Are we going to fund it through growth? Right, what's the first thing you're doing? We're putting capital gains tax up, which punishes businesses for investing.
Also,
so capital gains is basically you buy some, but invest in a business, the business does well, it's worth more, you sell it on, they all tax you on the profit you make. There's already a tax, they're going to put it up. That is going to be a massive disincentive to do business in the UK when
you just go somewhere else. And people do. The next thing, people do go somewhere else. But this is the thing, all of the main parties and the smaller parties, everything they do, whether you're a Green Party, the Liberal Democrats, Reform, as well as all the two main parties, all of their policies are predicated on we want to grow the economy, we would have growth. Well, everyone says that. For 20 years, we've barely had any growth at all. Why not? What's going wrong?
And nobody is prepared to address the productivity crisis that's going on in this country. British workers are not producing any more, despite AI, computers and all the rest of it, than they were before. Now, I suspect anyone that's sat through the hours and hours and hours of HR nonsense, the form filling, the diversity madness and all the rest of it, can tell you why they're no more productive than they were 10 years ago, because they're having to fill up all the time they've gained from being better with all of this nonsense.
And the public sector is much worse. I mean, the public public sector productivity has improved by, I mean, like sort of 2 or 3% in 20 years. But private sector has actually improved massively, and actually, interestingly, post-pandemic.
Yeah.
But when working from home, massive in the public sector, that was supposed to improve productivity. Lots of studies showing it doesn't. Well, apparently people are happier because they don't have to schlep into the office. But they're not. They're not producing anymore. But the whole argument was, I'm so much more productive at home.
And do you think for a moment that this is going to get better under Labour? That's the question. So my worry is actually what you'll see within 2-3 years is this whole Labour plan unravelling, as they aren't able to deliver the growth other than by borrowing. And it was interesting that the head of the Unite Union over the weekend was calling for an increase in what she called borrow to invest. That's just another word for borrow. Without doing that, which would of course break one of Labour's fiscal rules, I don't see how they can fund anything like what they want to pay for, and it's going to all possibly come crumbling down.
It's going to be absolutely fascinating to watch. I think it's going to be very interesting to watch. I mean, anything's better than a general election campaign. That's all I can say. I love election results. By the way, I'll be here on election day when we're not obviously allowed to talk about anything politics. So let's start planning what we're going to talk about that day. It might be probably the most interesting show we do for ages. But in the evening at 10 p.m, the exit poll comes out, and then the reins are off, the Ofcom rules are off, Purda guidance, and then we can talk much more freely. We were going pretty free these days anyway. My thing, I just criticise them all. Then I'm fine. But at 10 p.m. till 1 a.m, I'll be on air here with you on election night. It's going to be fascinating. It's going to be very, very similar, I think. And again, back on the Friday morning. But it's going to be fascinating watching the other broadcasters as well, because they are, to a man and a woman, so excited about a Labour government, and it's going to be really interesting to watch.
This is everything the metropolitan Liberal elites have been dreaming of for the last
solution to
14
everything.
years.
And when in a year or two's time nothing has changed, which is realistically what is going to happen, because whether it's Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer in number 10, it's exactly the same issues, the same budget, the same problems.
Well, look, the media have done a pretty good job, in my view, of scrutinising the work of this government over the last 15 years. What will be very interesting to see is when some of these inevitable problems arise, when people point out some of the crazy things that are going on in schools and universities and hospitals, things like the trans policy. Will the media scrutinise them quite so carefully, or will they perhaps call those pointing it out conspiracy theorists?
Well, I think they'll just call us bigots, which is what they've been doing for quite some time. I memean, genuinely, I'm just still so angry with Conservative ministers over the years not dealing with a lot of these culture war issues when they could have. And I find it unforgivable, particularly for children and the protections for children. We shall see what happens there. In terms of where the Tories are with their election campaign, I mean, everything seems to still be just, it's about the D-Day, walking away from D-Day early, and now it's all about this betting scandal. It's been likened, I mean, even by, some Tories, along with, Partygate. It's just a sort of, I'm all right, Governor, I'll just, one rule for me, one for everyone else. I've got some inside information, going to put a load of bets on, make some money. 2 Tory candidates, 2 Tory aides, they're now widening it, looking at other all of the bets that raised, if you're winning more than £199, basically we want to look into it and see who placed that money. If you got that information from being in a meeting where you were told the election's on July the 4th, I'm sorry, you've got no business being in public life.
Yeah, look, a previous Labour manifesto was called the longest suicide note in history. This whole campaign seems like almost a suicide mission by the Conservative Party. I mean, everything that you could dream up to go wrong has gone wrong. And you're now left with a Prime Minister that is frankly missing in action. At this point in the campaign, the Prime Minister in any general election campaign should be flying around the country on a chopper, making dozens, literally dozens of national media appearances a day. Where is the guy? We see some written words from him in the Daily Mail today. Spoiler alert, wasn't actually written by him, so he's just signed it off.
These articles never are.
But we are just not seeing him. And there is a conscious decision being made within the the Conservative campaign headquarters to keep the Prime Minister, to keep the leader of the Conservative Party away from the cameras, away from the public, because they think people are more likely to vote for him the less they see of him.
which is fascinating, isn't it? And again, we see this in some elections where basically it's all about, say 2019, it's all about Boris apparently, and then put him on the leaflets. But there are people, we've had candidates, have we not? Let's not name them because it just gets into difficulties. The candidates who've actually put Tory candidates who've put Nigel Farage on their literature, pictures of them, but not put Rishi Sunak. That's quite telling. Whereas now it's all Keir Starmer, Keir Starmer, Keir Starmer.
Sure. I mean, dozens of Conservative candidates across the country have been basically campaigning as if they aren't Conservatives, right? They've been putting their leaflets in green or in red. We've seen people doing reform for so-and-so. They are claiming that they personally, and to be honest with you, many of them have been pushing for all of this common sense stuff that hasn't happened. And they are now getting told by the voters, well, I like you, but I don't much like that Rishi fellow.
Or I like the policies, but you could have done this over the last 14 years. That, again, that's one of the troubles of being in power that length of time, isn't it?